The 655th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17-second clip. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the arms. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Blackshear for three. Back iron, 1 second to play. Stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony, we're back with you here on a Thursday, here to take a look at the updated NCAA Tournament projections. We're about that time of the season with conference play, about halfway through for all the major conferences. That bracketology is starting to heat up, and this is going to be a talking point throughout every broadcast on every major game here moving forward. So what I went and looked at were like the four most reputable sites for NCAA tournament projection stuff to give you a glimpse of where Carolina is at as of today, going into this week's matchup, and kind of talk about Carolina's tournament ceiling going from there. So it's been a busy week of pods with Carolina gone on an off week, no midweek game this week. We hope that you went back and listened to Ashton's analysis as well as the interviews we had with former Tar Heel Joel Berry, as well as beat writer Shelby Swanson. We've really enjoyed all the content we've brought you, and when we look forward to today's episode and getting back to our game previews, they'll return on Friday when we get you ready for the matchup in Atlanta with Georgia Tech. We start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to Michael Jordan for that pod thought, and that thought is, quote, "I never looked at the consequences of missing a big shot. When you think about the consequences, you always think of a negative result," end quote. And I think that's a really good mindset to have. I think it's a really good mindset that you'd maybe want someone like Kyan Evans to really adopt here moving forward. It feels like in his shooting struggles that he's shooting not to make, but he's shooting hoping not to miss. If that makes maybe any sense to you. I think, some of these guys that you've seen maybe play a little bit more carefree since they got moved to the backup role, like a Luka Bogovac, not really thinking about the consequences, just going out there and really playing. I think those are some situations where this quote could directly apply to where Carolina is at right now. 16-4, 4-3 in the league, and 4-4, if you will, in quad one opportunities. Let's set the scene, Anthony, for the NCAA tournament stuff by looking at some numbers for Carolina. As of today, we're recording on Thursday. January 29th. And Carolina finds themselves, 29th in KenPom. So they're the 29th overall in KenPom. They've got the number 21 offense in the country. They've got the number 55 defense in the country. Their net rating is 24th overall, so a pretty healthy number there in the net. They're 4-4 in quad one, 1-0 in quad two, so they're 5-4 in the first two quadrants, and they're 11-0 in quad three, quad four. 8 of their final 11 games are going to be in the first two quadrants. So a really good chance for Carolina to improve upon where they find themselves kind of being projected at seed-wise, or if it goes the other way, they could find themselves back on that 7, 8, 9 line, kind of where they were pre the win over Virginia. When you look at where Carolina is at right now, just from an NCAA tournament perspective, they're not on the bubble, which was one of the goals going into the season. And they've got a chance here over the final 11 games to play their way into being maybe one of the top 16 seeds of the field come Selection Sunday.
Yeah, I think this is, maybe where we expected them to be preseason. I think sort of in that range, 24th in the net, I think is solid, but not great. Conference-wise, 4-3 in the conference. I think maybe some people thought that Carolina would get off to a little bit of a better start in conference than that. But still, all things considered, you're in a pretty good spot. You've got 4 quad one wins. Those were the things that we were talking the most about last year as a reason to why Carolina was on the bubble. This year, they don't have to necessarily worry about those. And the ACC is better around them. So I think, as you said, it really bodes well for Carolina to be able to play Duke, which is going to stay a quad one game. Miami, going to stay a quad one game. Same thing with NC State. There are some other games, Louisville, Clemson, that are sort of on the precipice of being games that will stick as quad one games, some that might fall to quad two games as the season goes along. But even still, Carolina's got the majority of those games, that are basically locked up as quad one games, and ones that will be able to help them or could potentially hurt their seeding a little bit. But, there's only 3 quad 3 games remaining. It's the 2 that you play this next week or starting on Saturday and then eventually into the middle of next week. And then Pittsburgh. Those are the only games that you look at and say are quad 3 games. So there's not a lot of games that can really hurt Carolina that much either. So I think that's what you really like about Carolina's slate at this point. As I said, I think this is kind of where I expected them to be in the preseason, was in this area. They're not necessarily a team that's, sitting as in the conversation as one of the best in college basketball, but they're ones that are sitting in a position right now where could I see them be, part of the bracket reveal that we get in a couple of weeks as potentially a team that's on the 4 line, maybe even jump up to the 3 line, depending on what ultimately happens before then. Yeah, I could see that. And I think that's a pretty decent spot to be in if you're Carolina, especially after some of those losses that we looked at and said were potentially going to be pretty damaging for Carolina to Stanford and to California.
Let's take a look at the first 2 projections and kind of compare them. As I mentioned, I grabbed 4 total. I went to ESPN, Fox Sports, CBS Sports, and the Field of 68. We'll start with ESPN, and we'll start with Joe Lunardi. This was as of Tuesday, so 2 days removed from the last time he updated his NCAA tournament projections. We're not at the point yet where he's in the bunker updating hour by hour, game by game. He has Carolina projected as a 6 seed in the Midwest region, and their first-round matchup would be against one of the final 2 undefeated teams in the sport, mid-major darling Miami of Ohio. The thing is about where he has Carolina seated in the Midwest, they would have their first-round matchup be played in Greenville. So no, not Greensboro, not Raleigh, not Charlotte, but that's where Carolina started their journey back in 2017 to the national championship. And both of those games in the first 2 rounds, there was a large Carolina contingent there. So it'd be a place where, Carolina, not a high seed, if you will, but could still be playing virtually in its backcourt or in its backyard. And then the other one that we'll kind of compare it to, we'll look at Fox Sports. Also, this one updated as of Tuesday. Mike DeCourcy is their bracketologist, longtime Hall of Fame, college hoops writer, a frequent guest to all the shows at WFNZ, one of the best guys in the business. And what you'll see between these two bracket projections is an immediate disparity. He has Carolina projected as a 4 seed in the West region, with their first round matchup being against North Dakota State. So you mentioned that there's a chance you could see Carolina in the bracket reveal that we get here in a couple weeks. Well, according to Mike DeCourcy, if that reveal were to happen today, Carolina would be among the 16 teams that you'd see listed in that initial bracket. So when you look at these 2 brackets projected by 2 of the best in the business, whether we all know how we've grown to feel about Lenardi. The good news is that the ACC is good, so he's not going to be able to talk down about the league. He has, I think, 9 projected teams to make the field as of right now. And then you look at Mike DeCourcy. What stands out to you about those 2 bracket projections for Carolina?
Well, I mean, first of all, the matchup that Joe Lenardi has is certainly one that would be very entertaining. I mean, you're talking about a team that is undefeated so far this year. They have had to go to overtime in each of their last 2 games. I think that was before last night's game that they ended up winning in regulation. I mean, this is one of the teams that I think everybody's going to be most interested in playing. And, you wonder, are you going to want that team come NCAA tournament time? Because where are they going to be at? If they're a team that comes in there, somehow rolls in undefeated, I think that's one that you probably do want if you're a team that is on that 6 line, 7 line, potentially with them even climbing up a little bit further, because it would feel like their run has to end at some point. But if they've taken a couple losses, I think they are a really good basketball team. So that could certainly be a very interesting matchup for Carolina. Of course, I love where Mike DeCourcy has them. I mean, a 4 seed now, granted, it would be in the West region, so things wouldn't be nearly as easy. Carolina not the most successful when they've had to go out in the West bracket. But at the same time, I think that would certainly show you that Carolina is taking steps towards where we thought they could be earlier in the season. And I think that projection right there really shows you that Carolina does have a higher ceiling than maybe some people think. And we're going to talk about where that exactly is here in a minute. But I think it also shows that those losses to Cal, those losses to Stanford, maybe people are just looking at that as a little bit of a blip on the radar, and that this team really is as good as their win over Kansas, as good as their win over Virginia, as good as their win over Kentucky, even though, that win took a little bit of a blow last night with how poorly Kentucky played in that game against Vanderbilt. Even still, I think this would probably be, one that you would prefer. You'd like Carolina to be the higher seed, gives them a better chance to get out of the first round. I think also, facing a 5 seed as opposed to having to face a 3 seed would be much more advantageous for Carolina. That sort of explains itself. But you would definitely feel like Carolina might have a chance to make it to that second weekend pretty confidently. And I think that's where we want to be, right? We want to be confident that Carolina can make it into that second weekend. And I think with Mike DeCourcy's projection, it gives you a little bit more hope that Carolina can do that.
Yeah, I was surprised, I think, by both. I thought I would have seen Carolina at a 5 by both bracketologists. And I say that because according to Bracket Matrix, which is a site that takes every bracketologist data and combines it and really kind of seeds the field, Carolina is the final 5 seed according to that website. So according to over 100 different bracket projections, and yes, there are that many people that do this for a living, Carolina has kind of come in on that 5 line. So to see Lenardi have them as a 6 feels kind of low because you've got 4 quad 1 wins, and you've got wins that could age really, really well, with especially the wins over Kansas and Virginia. But to see, DeCourcy already at a 4 feels kind of high, because that would suggest that Carolina could play its way to the 3 line, maybe the back end of the 2 line. And we'll talk about that here a little bit later in the show, where we think Carolina kind of caps itself out from a seed projection. Let's move on to the other 2. CBS Sports, theirs was updated as of Wednesday. And that, of course, Jerry Palm is the guy that does their bracketology, and he has Carolina as a 6 seed in the East region. Their projected opponent would be Tulsa. And the one kind of note that I took out of that is, he has Carolina and Duke in the same region. Like Duke, it would be Carolina's 1 seed. It's very rare that you see bracketologists even project that, because we've only seen them meet one time in the tournament. That was in the Final Four. And most times when the bracket is put together, those 2 programs are put on the opposite side. So if they ever were to meet, it would be on the biggest stage, which of course is the final Monday night when playing for a national championship. This would have Carolina with a potential matchup with their rival in the Elite Eight, with a spot on win the Final Four on the line. Then you go to the Field of 68. They updated their stuff as of Monday. They're doing stuff every Monday, Friday. So this stuff will be updated when we preview the Georgia Tech game. But as of Monday, they had Carolina as a 5 seed in the West, with their projected opponent, Stephen F. Austin, a program that's no stranger to making magic happen when they get into the NCAA tournament. When you look at what Jerry Palm is projecting for Carolina, when you look at what the Field of 68 is projecting for Carolina, what stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of in that similar range, but ultimately I think, the more preferred route would, of course, be with what you got from the Field of 68. I think that certainly is the more advantageous route for Carolina, going up against Stephen F. Austin, a team that's had some success, a program that has had some success in the NCAA tournament. But ultimately, in a 5-12 matchup could be difficult for Carolina, but they do end up drawing one of the mid-majors. So that's one that you would hope Carolina would be able to find their way through. And then, of course, sets up with a 4 seed, which once again, going to be a little bit easier than taking on whoever the 3 seed is that you're going to face. And then, when it comes to CBS Sports, I mean, Tulsa, another one of those teams that's from a mid-major conference that's having a really strong year. Another stiff test it would be probably for Carolina. I think that's certainly a matchup that Carolina, we would still feel pretty confident they would be able to win. But again, it sets up that matchup against a 3 seed, because Carolina is listed as a 6 seed. So I'm with you. I think the 6 seeds probably feel a little bit low. I would probably think of them as a 5 seed right now. When I looked the other day at the bracketology from Joe Lenardi, I was a little disappointed not to see Carolina had made that jump after the win against Virginia, because we talked about it being the biggest win of the season for Carolina. I think that was worth at least jumping them up to the 5 line. But I think it shows you that there still is a little bit of work to do for Carolina here if they want to be in a position where they're used to being, where they feel comfortable playing as the favorite through the first weekend. I still think it's definitely possible for Carolina, but it shows you that because of those losses to Stanford and Cal, that's the thing that's holding you down just a little bit, even though if you look at the record that Carolina has gotten off to, it is, pretty much where we were hoping Carolina would be, if not, a little better than we possibly thought coming into the season.
The thing about being punished for the losses to Cal and to Stanford is they're quad 1 losses. Like if they were in quad 2, quad 3, I could understand that.
Well, Stanford's getting close. Stanford is 71st, so they're going to be right on the precipice of potentially becoming a quad 2 loss. Cal is not really. Cal's 52nd, so you should still be good on that one.
Yeah, but this isn't horseshoes. Close doesn't matter. If it's a quad 1 loss, it's a quad 1 loss. And I don't want to be out here begging to be rewarded for losing, but quad 1 losses should not hurt you the way that a quad 2, quad 3, God forbid, a quad 4 loss should. But I think what you've seen, especially with CBS and what you've seen with ESPN, is maybe they have Carolina seated lower. I think those are the two bracket projections where they are giving Carolina room to improve their seeding because they know they've got two matchups with Duke. They got to go to State. They got to play Miami. 8 of the final 11 are quad 1, quad 2 games. So I think with the Carolina being seeded 6 to those guys, there's a greater chance for them to move up and get a higher seed come Selection Sunday than maybe what you see with Fox Sports already having Carolina on that 4 line, Field of 68 having Carolina on that 5 line, which is where I told you that's what I feel like to me Carolina is. I think if I was seeding a field, I would probably have Carolina right there on the 5 line. And look, that would still be outdoing what they should be according to Ken Palmer, they're 29th, and the net where they check in right now, 24th. When you look at this moving forward, because this, as I mentioned, will be something that we'll be kind of be monitoring the rest of the year. Where do you think Carolina's ceiling for an NCAA tournament seed is? And we can kind of play this game, if you will. I joined Isaac Shade, Locked On Tar Heels podcast. If you don't follow it, you should go check it out. He's tremendous. So am I. And we had a lot of fun talking Carolina basketball earlier this week. But we did a game of buy or sell about Carolina being a top 4 seed come Selection Sunday. I bought it. I think by the time that we get there, Carolina is going to be a top 4 seed. Now, they could be the 15th or the 16th overall seed, but I still think they're going to be a top 4 seed when we get that bracket on March 15th. Do you agree with that sentiment? What do you think is the ceiling for Carolina's seed this year?
Yeah, I feel pretty confident that Carolina can get there. I think this past week really turned things back in the right direction for Carolina. Now, it could be one of those wins over Virginia. I mean, I know people are probably going to say, well, that team almost lost to Notre Dame last night. Still think Virginia is going to be one of the better teams in the ACC this year. They're going to continue to challenge to be one of those top 4 teams in the ACC. And so if they do that, that's a win that Carolina, I think, can really build on. I think there are some important games that Carolina has to get if they're going to be a top 4 seed. I think that Miami game, that's one that you absolutely have to win. NC State, probably a game that you have to win. And then you've got to probably get either the Louisville game or the Clemson game to be feeling confident that you can be a top 4 seed or, a team that's, challenging for what I think their ceiling could be, which could be a 3 seed, maybe even sneaking onto that second line. Now, the second line, that would basically be you almost have to run the table. Maybe you could suffer a loss to Duke. Maybe you end up splitting that, but every other game goes your way the rest of the way. And then you go and do something pretty decent in the ACC tournament. I think that would probably get you to that 2 line because I do think if you have 4 conference losses, I think there's a chance that's going to be good enough to finish 2nd, maybe 3rd in the conference. I think it's going to be in that area. I think, getting to that 2nd spot in the conference would be where you'd want to get to. And I don't think that's completely off the table for Carolina because of the upside of some of the guys on this team. But I do think that, when it's all said and done, I think you're right. I would still buy it. I would think Carolina is probably going to be somewhere snugly on that 4 line because I believe that they are going to split with Duke. I believe that most of those games that I pointed out, Carolina, having to win, especially I think Miami and NC State are two games that I think Carolina can get after what they did against Virginia. They're going to feel confident enough going on the road that they should be able to win those two games. You take care of those, you've got yourself a good opportunity with the number of quad one wins that you're going to have on your resume to potentially be a 4 seed when it's all said and done. Hey, that's not quite where the standard is at Carolina. We always want to be a 1 or a 2 seed, but I think this year, especially where we were just a couple of weeks ago with where this team was at, I think that you would definitely take that if you're a Carolina fan.
Yeah, look, two things. If Carolina wins out, which I don't think they're going to, but if Carolina were to run the table, they'd get to 27-4, and that means that they would have, they'd add 8 more wins to the first 2 quadrants. That means that they would be 13-4 in quad 1, quad 2. Carolina would be a 1 seed come Selection Sunday, because you would project that you would have 2 wins over Duke. You would maybe get another loss from Duke along the way. Carolina would be an ACC regular season champion, and with double-digit, quad 1, quad 2 wins, with wins over Duke, Kansas, Kentucky. That's those are going to carry a lot more weight than some other quad 1 wins. So their ceiling is a 1, because there's still a pathway to get there if they were to win out, which obviously you can do that until you lose a game. I'm not projecting that to happen. I think the more realistic ceiling for this group is that 2 line. There's a much more feasible path for them to get there, to where, because even if Carolina goes 10-1, I would imagine they would be they'd be right there in the conversation, for the 2 seeds. We got to wait and see how some of the dust settles with some of these teams that we're starting to learn a lot more about. Purdue's lost 3 straight. Nebraska lost for the first time, last night to Michigan. I think those are 2 teams that are going to be in that conversation to be, among the first 4 for the seed lines, if you will. So, how do those programs maybe, to respond? And what does Carolina do in the next, 3.5, 4 weeks to maybe put themselves in that conversation? Because it felt like when Carolina was a 1 seed 2 years ago, it felt like that was something that group was chasing. It felt like it mattered to that group to be a high tournament seed once they put themselves in that position to achieve such a thing. I think this is a group that's pretty motivated. They just got their most significant win, we believe, of the season, winning at Virginia. And if that win is what we think it is, it should be the jump start to Carolina rattling off a bunch of wins here. Like they should beat Georgia Tech. They should beat Syracuse. You get Duke at home, you probably expect to win that game. That Louisville game at home, you probably expect to win that game, maybe more so than you thought this time, a few weeks ago. You won at Virginia, so why can't you go to State and win? Why can't you go to Miami and win? So I'm not saying that's where I think Carolina is going to get, but I do think their realistic ceiling is on that 2 line. I think the highest they will ultimately climb, I think, is going to be a 3. Because I'm with you. I think they're going to split at Duke, or they're going to split with Duke. I think we get the game at Chapel Hill. They get the game in Durham. I don't know what the rest of the ACC schedule looks like for them. I'd love to think that they go to NC State and win. God knows I don't have to recap that game and talk about Will Wade beating us. I would like to think they go to Miami and win. Would it shock me, though, if they lost either one of those 2 games? If I'm being honest with that answer is no, with how different this team has looked at home as compared to on the road. So, is Carolina where maybe we thought they were going to be when they were 12-1? I think the answer is no. I think going back into Christmas, we kind of were talking about how all of ACC play was going to be spent playing for NCAA tournament seeding and position. And while that's still kind of the case, I think that seed line is a little bit lower than we thought probably 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly is the case. I mean, when you were 12-1, which you probably should have been. I mean, if we're being honest, I said, maybe you were ahead of schedule. You're not. I mean, this was where we thought this team should be with the schedule that they had. Maybe you believed that Kentucky was a game that Carolina would lose in the non-conference, and then maybe they would lose a couple of games to start out conference play. But I think for the most part, you felt like this was where Carolina was ultimately going to be. But yeah, 12-1, you really, I think, were feeling like maybe because I think a part of it was because that was the best start that you had since that 08-09 season. Maybe that really started to cloud some judgment about where exactly this Carolina team was at. We should have partially known that things were going to be a little bit more difficult. One, the ACC is better this year than it was last year. I mean, there is no denying that at this point. I mean, you look at this. I mean, we were talking about last year. I mean, there were games on the ACC schedule. There were multiple games that you looked at down the stretch of the year that were quad 3 and quad 4 games. There were quad 4 teams in the ACC last year. That's how bad some of these teams were. And now you look at the rest of the schedule and you see a bunch of quad 1 matchups that Carolina still has. I mean, as I mentioned, there's only 3 quad 3 matchups left remaining on the schedule for Carolina. And when you look at it, Carolina's played 2 in prior to that. So it shows you that most of the teams that Carolina has had to play, they've been in either quad 1 or quad 2. It just shows the strength of the conference ultimately. But the other thing was, I think we should have known that Carolina played a little bit of a weaker schedule. And so it was going to be a little bit more difficult for them when they got into conference play and they were having to play legitimate opponents every single night that they stepped on the floor. And you could see towards the end of non-conference play, they did start sleepwalking through some of those games. Now what you're hoping is that game with Virginia was really what turned everything in the right direction. And I think there is a really good case to be made that it did. That's a place that you have not had a lot of success in the past. It was a game that, Carolina, had to show that they had taken steps defensively. You're looking for a more consistent performance than you got in that game. But I think we're seeing some signs of a team that's starting to get back to being that team that we thought they were after that Kansas win. We thought they were after they survived Kentucky. That's where I think you want to get to. And so, yeah, there's reasons to be confident. I think, coming up here, this next stretch that Carolina has where they play Georgia Tech and Syracuse, you feel pretty good about. And then, as you mentioned, you've got that game with Duke. If you could find a way to win that game, and I don't think it's impossible. I think Duke is a really good team. I think they're probably still the favorite to win the ACC. I don't really see how anybody would think that they're not the favorite to win the ACC. I think that with that game being at home, with the way that Carolina has played in some of their bigger games this season, they could get it done. And that's when we can ultimately start talking about just how high is the ceiling for this Tar Heel team in terms of their seeding. But yeah, right now I'm with you, man. I think 2-line probably a pretty safe area. And if you can get to that 2-line, man, that's a heck of a season for Carolina.
If we got to talk about the ceiling, we have to talk about the floor. And to provide some context, when I was projecting, doing some good, homework on the podcast, knew we had a week off, was trying to outline this week of content that we brought you guys. And again, remind you, Ashton's analysis, Joel Berry interview, Shelby Swanson interview. I knew we were going to do this topic of NCAA tournament check-in. Carolina, before the win at Virginia, was on the 7 line. So not near the bubble, still healthy enough in the field, but, a lot lower than you would probably like to see and want to be, because those 7-10 matchups are pretty much a coin flip once you get into the NCAA tournament. If you were to advance and you get a 2 seed, the chances are you are going out in the round of 32. that could open up a litany of discussions that we don't want to have as two guys that are critical of Hubert Davis, but support Hubert Davis and want him to be the right guy to lead this program for the next 10 to 15 years. So with that kind of context provided for you, if you think that the two line is Carolina's ceiling, what do you think their floor is for the 2026 NCAA tournament?
I mean, I just find it so hard to look at the games that Carolina has remaining and think that they are going to suffer a bad loss somewhere along the way. I mean, if they do, it would probably be Saturday on the road at Georgia Tech. We have seen some teams that have had some trouble there. NC State, not even going there. NC State at home lost to that team. So maybe, I mean, with Mighty Mouse being a guy that looks like he's going to be on the hot seat, that team, could put up a feisty game against Carolina. But I mean, what they've done at home, they have been sensational in the Smith Center. And so Syracuse, I'm not fearful of that game. Pittsburgh, not fearful of that game. Virginia Tech later on, that's a quad 2 game. Not fearful that Carolina is going to lose that game. So I find it really hard to get to a point where I say this team is on the bubble because, one, I don't think they're going to lose to Georgia Tech on Saturday. I do think that Carolina will end up winning that game. We'll talk about that, of course, a little bit more on Friday's edition of the show. But if I'm sitting here right now, I'm just being honest, I think Carolina wins that game. Team like Syracuse, playing them on the road, I think Carolina can go there and win. They've had some success going there and winning. But, I mean, yeah, let's say they do lose a majority of their quad 1 games. That's been an area where Hubert Davis has struggled. I think you could have them get back down to that 7 line. Maybe if they lose, I mean, if all of them go the other way, like let's say they lose at Miami, they lose at State, Louisville finds something. And then, maybe even that, I find it hard to believe that Louisville and Clemson, Carolina doesn't get one of those games. So yeah, maybe even the 8 line is pushing it a little bit. That's probably the lowest I could see them getting to is the 8 line. I think the legitimate floor, though, is probably the 7 line. So Carolina's positioned themselves well, but I think if you're them, you want to keep taking those steps towards being a team that can get into the conversation for, the 4 line, the 3 line, and eventually maybe even that 2 line.
This might sound a little homeristic. This might be me looking at this through Carolina blue lenses, and probably not what you expect me to say after how vitriolic I was after losing to Cal and Stanford. Their floor is where they're at. Like, their floor is 6. I don't see them falling below where the lowest projected tournament bracketologist guy has them. And I say that because if there's one thing that I believe about this team in my heart, this team's not going to lose games at home. Like this, yeah. We might be talking about a team that goes undefeated at home. They protect home court. And if you do that, well, guess what? You're going to add a win to Duke over on your resume. You're going to add a win over Louisville on your resume. That runs you to 6 quad 1 wins, man. I don't have every data point in front of me since we adopted the net. I don't know how many teams that had 6 quad 1 wins were lower than a 5 or a 6 seed come Selection Sunday. And I think at the minimum, that's where Carolina's going to be, while not also having the bad loss to go with it. Like the game against Pittsburgh, I think Carolina going to win going away. The Syracuse game, I think Carolina will win that one going away. So I think kind of right now where they are is their floor. Maybe, if a team gets hot out of another power conference where they got a bunch of quad 1, quad 2 games, maybe Carolina gets bumped down to a 7, but that's about as low as I can see them going. I don't see them backing themselves up to the 8, 9, 10 line. Heaven forbid, I don't see them falling back into the 11 line where they could find themselves back in Dayton like they were a year ago, having to play in the first 4. And so I think, Carolina, if this is the worst that it's going to be, then Carolina is going to be a 5 or a 6 seed come Selection Sunday. Still might not be where we want it to be, where we thought we were going to be, but I think they've kind of met their floor, and now it's kind of either maintaining that or improving upon that. And as we've talked about, with 8 of your final 11 in the first two quadrants, you kind of determine that. If Carolina, let's say, goes 7-1 in those quad 1, quad 2 matchups, they're going to climb a seed line, maybe 2 seed lines. If they're iffy, they stay 500, they go 4-3, 3-4, whatever it is, 4-4, excuse me. Maybe they stay right there where they are. We just have to wait and see. I do think it's important to stress this, and it's going to come across as defensive, and maybe that's what I want to do here. If Carolina does end up being a 5 or a 6 seed, I don't think that should suggest they had an underwhelming regular season. If you're not paying attention to the sport on a national level, you need to start. There are a lot, and I mean a lot, of really good teams in college basketball. We've seen what NIL and the transfer portal has done for college football and opened up parity. The same impact has happened to college basketball on a much more larger scale, but the sport isn't as popular, so it doesn't get talked about as much. But when we enter the tournament, you're going to hear Jay Billis say there are 20 to 24 teams that could get to the Final Four. That answer this year is closer to 30. And I hope you guys trust me when I tell you that, because I'm in college basketball mode. It's on my TV every single night. I'm watching, yes, our league that we play in extensively, but Big 12, Big 10, Big East, along with some high mid-major conferences as well. So, while we want to be on those top 2 seed lines because we're spoiled Carolina fans, and that's what we're used to seeing, Carolina could still be a real quality team, a real dangerous team, and still have a 5 beside their name come Selection Sunday, maybe even a 6. And that's what we'll be monitoring. That's what we'll be kind of following through the rest of the regular season, because, you're 3 games behind Duke. Is winning an ACC regular season title likely? Only if you sweep them, and that's going to be a tall task. But we'll be monitoring where we think Carolina ultimately does end up when we get to Selection Sunday, which is only 7 Sundays away. So we're closing in on Super Bowl Sunday, and then pretty much from there it's a countdown on to Selection Sunday, where we get the bracket that will deliver the greatest sporting event we have here in America, which is the NCAA Tournament. One closing note for you guys that I want to go over, and then we'll get out of this edition of the podcast. Against my thoughts and desires and well wishes, the CBS Sports Classic has been renewed, but there is a bit of a twist. UCLA, was permanently withdrawn from the event because Mick Cronin hates traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast as much as he has to do during the Big Ten season. Of course, St. John's was the filler this past year. They have added Kansas to the fold. So with the 4-year renewal, Kansas is now the 4th school, joining Carolina, Kentucky, and Ohio State. And we've got the matchups for the next 4 years. The Heels will play Kentucky at the Garden in 2026-2027 season. In the 2027-2028 season, Carolina will play Kansas. In the 28-29 campaign, Carolina will play The Ohio State University. And in 29-30, which was now the last current year of the contract, Carolina will play Kentucky once again. Any quick thoughts on the addition of Kansas and the next 4 matchups for Carolina in this, I don't want to call it prestigious non-conference event, but one of the more marquee events on the calendar for Carolina fans?
Yeah, I mean, one of the event that clearly is more well-liked than we thought it was, because we thought there was a good chance that this was going away and that Carolina wouldn't have to play in this moving forward. I don't think it's the worst thing, because it does test Carolina, and you do want some of those on the schedule moving forward. I know that we don't expect that Carolina is going to schedule the same way that they did this year in every season, but at the same time, we've talked about how they're a team that doesn't necessarily want to go to these Thanksgiving Day tournaments. They don't want to be involved in some of those events. And so if they don't want to be involved in those, it's up to them to actually schedule difficult games that will test this team when they go through the non-conference. I think having this as a staple is not necessarily the worst thing. It means more neutral site games with some of these big name programs. So not quite what we're looking for in terms of playing more of these home and homes, but you're still going to play Kentucky, continue to build that rivalry. You'll have the rivalry with Kansas as well. And then you got the weird game with Ohio State that, again, they just stick out like a sore thumb from these programs. I get it. Ohio State's got some basketball history. It's nowhere even close to these three that are in this event. If they could get replaced, then I think you could have something special, especially if they were to be replaced. Ideally a team like a UCLA would probably be ideal, maybe an Indiana, something like that. But I don't think it's the worst thing in the world because guaranteed, this is going to be one of those non-conference games that's going to test Carolina. It can give them a signature win in the non-conference, and that's never necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I would have liked to see the fourth school be added, be UConn. I think they'd be a natural fit. They are a blue blood in the sport. Dan Hurley's the face of the sport. Can't argue with Kansas. It's good for college basketball to see Carolina play Kansas. It's good for college basketball to see Kentucky play Kansas, and that'll start to happen a lot more frequently with Kansas being added to the event. With that is going to wrap up this edition of the show. In the meantime, guys, we want to encourage you to visit the website, HeelToughBlog.com. An article about Carolina's tournament check-in projections can be found on the website. Then I'll be getting you ready for the matchup with Georgia Tech on Saturday. That preview will go up on Saturday morning. We'll be back after the game with the recap as well as we continue to take you through the basketball season. Same thing with Carolina football. We got the schedule for next year. It was released in full earlier this week, and Anthony had you covered with that. We're still monitoring the transfer portal activity as well for Carolina, but believe it or not, Anthony will be getting you ready for spring practice, which is just now a little bit over a month away. So make sure you get to the website, HeelToughBlog.com, the latest and best coverage of Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, just search the Four Corners Podcasting will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any audio editions of the show throughout the remainder of the season. If you're a video consumer, the best way to get notified to be subscribed is to like and follow the Facebook page at Heel Tough Vlog, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Vlog, or follow me on Twitter at HTB_Josh. The second we go live, you'll get a notification set to your mobile device. You can jump in and be a part of the conversation. With that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go